am having, Mac.
Day by day, I think one of the hardest things to do is talk about the mainline Sonic the Hedgehog canon. What is canon? What isn't canon? How do we know? And where is everything placed in the Sonic the Hedgehog timeline? Is Sonic Sonic, or are there many different versions of Sonic? Is the Sonic we see in the game still the same thing we see in the movies and the TV shows? There's so many questions. Over a year ago, the official Sonic the Hedgehog Twitter tweeted, "Everything is canon," and I think this set the entire Sonic fandom ablaze. Is Ugly Sonic from Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers now part of the mainline Sonic canon lore? Is my OC Ryan the Hedgehog 2? How about Super Mario Bros. Z? Is that canon? To answer those questions, no, no, and no. Well, actually, I don't really know. But I'm gonna be honest, the Sonic the Hedgehog canon is a bit confusing, so I'm going to do whatever I can do in this video to pretty much straighten things out, and at least address the ways that it should be. Without a doubt, I do believe this tweet was just a joke. I don't think it should be taken that seriously. Like, I think there are some things in the Sonic the Hedgehog series that definitely are canon, but there are other things that just aren't. And even if it is a mainline official Sonic product, it still may not be in the mainline Sonic lore, or, I'm sorry, mainline canon. The first thing I want to do is get the obvious stuff out of the way. Movie Sonic is in no way, shape, or form in the actual mainline canon for this series. Movie Sonic and Modern Sonic are two separate Sonics. That's just fact. We all know this. And I think the same can be said for Classic Sonic as well, after the timeline split in Sonic Generations, which makes both of these two characters different in their own right. However, I would argue that considering Classic Sonic and Modern Sonic are still part of the same universe, I would say, then they should still be considered as part of game Sonic lore. No matter what happens to Classic Sonic, if there is a Sonic Mania 2 or whatever, it would still be considered canon to this mainline lore, if that makes sense. And obviously, in that regard, everything that happens to Movie Sonic in the past and going forward with the future movies obviously has no impact on the series directly in terms of what happens next with the characters, the story. These stories are not connected by any stretch of the imagination, only in utilizing the same characters and probably some of the same backstories. That's it. Now, we can say that Movie Sonic inspires, the game series, like Sonic now having electricity as some sort of effect in Sonic Frontiers, definitely being an inspiration from the movie. But I don't think that that would mean that Movie Sonic and Game Sonic, or the two of them, are related, other than just having the same name and abilities as well. Now, I do want to say this, that does not mean that one is better than the other. I'm not making a video talking about, why the game should be the peak part of Sonic. That's not what I'm saying here. I'm just saying that there's two distinct canons taking place here, when it's Game Sonic and Movie Sonic. Now, moving forward, we gotta talk about more of the harder stuff, like Sonic Prime, for example. I feel like this one is definitely a bit harder to talk about, considering it's not really marketed itself as being a different Sonic from a different universe, but we kind of have to look at some of the core details from Sonic Prime and see what we can really collaborate together with the games and see what fits and what doesn't. Now, there's two really big things about Sonic Prime that I feel like separates itself from the games. Like, for example, Sonic Prime Sonic, he calls Green Hill his home, as if to imply he lives there. But Game Sonic has never really made that distinction. He's never actually said, "Oh, I live here." I mean, he's called Green Hill his neighborhood once, I believe, in Sonic Forces, but other than that, it's not ever been mentioned. He just keeps going there for some reason, because Sonic loves adventuring. Now, that said, we do see that Sonic actually has a house of some kind in Sonic and the Secret Rings at the beginning of the game. Now, we have no idea where that is, we just know that he has one. Another important piece of information that I really do believe is imperative to include is where Tails lives. Now, this has actually been confirmed in several different locations in the mainline canon itself, whether it's be in Emerald Town or the Mystic Ruins and, his lab, but I feel like Emerald Town is probably the most solid piece of evidence we have, because in the game, there is a location actually referred to as Tails' house. It's not a workshop, it's not a lab, it's where he actually lives. Now, you see, this is also pretty hard to talk about too, because in earlier Sonic games like Sonic Adventure, Sonic and Tails would often say to each other, "Long time no see," or to be more precise, Sonic would say that to Tails as if to imply he hasn't seen him in a while. So maybe Sonic and Tails don't live in the same areas, but they just always hang out. I mean, anything is possible, but I do think that Tails' house could also be a pretty good indicator to where Sonic might live. But even then, since the games have never exactly expressed a single location where Sonic might live, and even if it was a house that he was living in Sonic and the Secret Rings, it's kind of hard to pinpoint an exact location or a location at all. So maybe Sonic is like a nomad or something. That said, with that information, we already can conclude that Sonic Prime has a slight inaccuracy. But even if that logic doesn't really fit as well as one might hope, we can still look at Sonic's characterization in this show and see that not everything is lining up here. Whether it be the designs of some of the characters in this series, or even just their characterization to their entirety, I think it's made pretty clear that Prime isn't exactly what I would call mainline Sonic canon. I feel like, much like the movie, it kind of has its own continuity. That said, I feel like it's possible that the events of previous Sonic games have happened in Sonic Prime. I feel like you could say that some of the events of these games have taken place before the events of this TV show, but still the TV show separates itself as being its own thing. So maybe these characters went through the exact same stuff as the game characters did, but in their own way, if that makes sense. Like, for example, when Sonic sees the Pirate Knuckles in Sonic Prime, he has this little flashback of what it was like when he first met Knuckles, pretty much, and it's kind of similar to how the games did it, and I think that kind of in its own way pretty much makes it clear that Sonic Prime does indeed reference other Sonic material from the games and utilizes that and creates its own little universe in itself. With that being said, I've already ruled out that Sonic Prime is not part of the mainline canon, the Sonic movies are not part of the mainline canon, and I also don't believe that the IDW comics are part of the mainline canon either. Now, I find this particularly harder to disprove than any other Sonic media, considering that the comics actually stay closest to the games as possible, and I feel like there really is no irrefutable fact to say otherwise, that they're not part of the canon, but either way, I'm going to try to do my best at disproving this right now. Now, I think one of my biggest arguments, if not my only argument, that fits to why the comics aren't part of the mainline canon is that there's no adequate time placing for any of the events. Now, for example, if the comics take place right after the events of Sonic Forces, then where do games like Sonic Frontiers and Team Sonic Racing, since that is in fact canon by the way, where do these games fall into play? Also, it's worth mentioning that in Team Sonic Racing, since again, this game is canon, Zavok is supposed to be the leader of, it seems to be a disbanded group known as the Deadly Six, meaning that they're not really around anymore. They don't really function as a group anymore. But in the IDW comics, it appears that's not the case, as this group is still alive and thriving, or I guess I use the term thriving loosely. That said, that's really my only argument. Then there is a perfect counterpoint to that in saying that Team Sonic Racing and Sonic Frontiers and all the other Sonic games that released, after Forces take place after the events of the comics when their run is finished. And that argument still really does work. I don't think there's any way to refute that, but there's also still no way to refute my point. So I think it's kind of pick and choose which way you want to believe in terms of thinking the comics are canon or not. However, in terms of the way I think, I don't believe the comics to their entirety are canon. I do think the characters in those comics are canon though. Like I talked about Tangle and Whisper. I think these characters are still actually part of the mainline Sonic canon, as Tangle was mentioned in Sonic Frontiers. And you're probably wondering, how can that be possible if the comics aren't canon, like I said before? Now, I think it's possible because those are different versions of those characters. I think the designs will probably still be the same if they're ever utilized in a future Sonic game, but I think that the way they navigate the world and the way that they interact with the characters and perhaps even their backstories themselves will be slightly altered, because I think they're going to realize that not everyone reads these comics, and if I was someone who didn't read them and I saw Tangle show up in a game, I'd be like, who the heck is this? Never even seen this character, and I could have been following the games from the very beginning and still be very confused. So I feel like in that regard, these characters are probably still going to get used in the future, but maybe not to the same way they are used in the comics. But just to reiterate, it is still entirely possible that the events of the comics take place before games like Team Sonic Racing and Sonic Frontiers. It's also worth noting that the Eggnet from the IDW comics was referenced in the Sonic Frontiers game in the Eggman log, so that also provides a bit more evidence as to why the IDW comics could possibly be canon, but maybe taking place before the events of these games. And now I think it's time we talk about Sonic Boom, which I think is yet another obvious one, at least a little bit. You see, Sonic Boom is not part of the mainline canon, but I think it's going to function in a way I think that IDW comics are going to function too, where the characters in those series still might be canon. Like, for example, Styx was mentioned in Sonic Frontiers, and I think that automatically makes her a now mainline Sonic character. That said, this really makes things interesting because I feel like Styx has only been in one actual modern Sonic character game, and that's not even like, part of the mainline games. This was a spin-off game with Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, and with that in mind, is Styx going to have that exact same design she had in Boom and personality as well? Because if she does, then I think we got a win here. But either way, this is interesting. But speaking of the events of other Sonic games, like spin-off games and even mainline games, I want to talk about Sonic 06 real quick, because I think there's a bit of confusion that I feel like should be addressed in some form. The events of Sonic 06 did not happen, but they technically also did, because only characters like Sonic and I believe Elise can remember them. This can be said because in Team Sonic Race in the Japanese localization, Sonic says, "You've come all the way from the future, so let's take a chance to enjoy a race." Silver says, "You're right, there's no point in getting concerned now." To which Sonic replies, "What happened to your energy when we first met? Weren't you all like, 'I will destroy you'?" Which is literally an exact line from Silver in Sonic 06. And Silver goes, "I do not recall saying anything like that." And then Sonic goes, "Well, the race is about to start, let's rock." And that's the end of their interaction. Now, the only reason I believe Elise remembers the events is because she was the one that was looking in the direction of Sonic towards the end of Sonic 06, and it kind of showed that, oh, maybe she remembers, meeting Sonic and the adventure that just happened, but there's no 100%, conclusion there. Also, I should have definitely explained this sooner, but TSR is only canon because it was referenced in Sonic Frontiers, as it was in one of the Eggman logs, so yeah. So if this spin-off game is canon, what about some of the other spin-off games like Sonic Riders? And those are canon as well, as Jet the Hawk was mentioned in Sonic Frontiers. I'm telling you, Sonic Frontiers ties a lot of this stuff together. Pretty much if you were mentioned in Sonic Frontiers, then you're just basically canon. That said, it seems like a lot of, if not basically all of the Sonic games are canon, and I'd even say spin-offs as well, like Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games. Unless noted otherwise, then yeah, I would just assume it's canon. That said, I don't know about its placement in anything, but still, it could be considered canon. Moving on though, we can talk about like the Tails tubes and the Twitter takeovers and all that other stuff. Now, Tails tubes, I believe, are 100% canon. These kind of help make sense of the nonsense and really provide that little piece of extra lore information for fans who actually want to hear it and make sense of Sonic's world. But when you go to stuff like the Twitter takeovers, I feel like that's just purely for fun. That's not meant to provide you any lore substance or any real backing to the stories themselves. It's literally just for fun. But I also want to talk about the animations that they released for Sonic the Hedgehog, like, the Chow in Space stuff, and also like Sonic Mania Adventures and Sonic Colors Rise of Wiz, the TSR animations, all that stuff. I feel like that is actually all canon too. I feel like that all takes place within the same game continuity. It's just a bit of extra information. Now, Chow in Space might not be like directly correlating to a specific game, but I still feel like it falls in the category of like, this is happening in Sonic's world, or this happened in Sonic's world. I feel like that just about covers everything I really wanted to say in this video in regards to what is canon in the Sonic the Hedgehog series and what should be canon and everything like that. But now I want to hear from you guys in the comment section down below. What do you think the canon should be in the Sonic the Hedgehog series? What is the mainline canon? What is the regular Sonic lore? Let me know all of your thoughts in the comment section down below. I'd love to see what you guys have to say. And also, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe on this video, as it would really help me out. That said, thank you all again so much for watching. This is Sonic signing out. Have a super blessed day, y'all.
Why are you playing that trash?